Right, so today I want to make a video updating everyone as usual and then get into some other important stuff. Now, there's two other really big things that came out yesterday. I mean, one of them bigger than the other, one of them Canadian related. So I want to talk about that. But first, getting into the cases from Canada yesterday, 79,521 confirmed cases, 5,955 dead. Alberta's officially below 1,000 active cases. Uh, we're also at 7 people in the ICU. We're down to 58 people in the hospital. Um, but the two numbers to most take note of is number one, 19 confirmed cases yesterday, which I've been tracking the numbers for over 2 months now. That is the lowest amount since we've started. That's probably the lowest amount since February, for all we know. Um, and the other big number to point out too is that we have a grand total of 4 people in the hospital north of Calgary. I'll repeat that again. We have 4 people in the hospital north of Calgary, which that's probably a population of what, 2 million, 2.5 million people maybe. And yet we have 4 people in the hospital. That's one per 500,000 roughly. Like I say, this whole keeping things locked down, it's at the point to where you're literally just kicking people when they're down. You're literally just laughing at people while telling them it's raining while you're peeing on them. Like this is where we're at. And I heard that it's not confirmed, but we may not move to stage 2 for another 3 weeks. Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? This makes no sense whatsoever. And I know I keep saying that, but the point being is that the whole point of this in the first place was to not overwhelm the hospitals. We have 4 people in the hospital north of Calgary. Like, again, what are we doing? What are we doing? So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to bring up. And the other thing I want to bring up is that the keep it locked down or we're all going to die crowd has basically retreated to uh, basically wishing outbreaks now that, oh, if we're going to reopen, I'm going to laugh at you guys. I hope we have a massive amount of outbreak because you're wrong and I'm right and we're all going to die if we don't keep things locked down. Like all these idiots. And like I said, they just keep moving the goalpost. Just keep moving the goalpost. Um, I heard MasterCard yesterday announce they're not going to be sending all their staff back until there's a vaccine. That is the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life. For the simple reason that number one, we may never get a vaccine. There's no SARS vaccine. There is no AIDS vaccine. We may never get one. And even if we do, Dr. Fauci has said multiple times, I believe, that it is very possible that the vaccine will be useless, that it won't even do anything. The initial tests on monkeys, it didn't even prevent them, so they're having to go back to the drawing board. Waiting for a vaccine is not a legitimate plan whatsoever, even if we knew for sure that it was going to work, which we don't. So that is not an argument. Uh, Anybody with half a brain when it comes to this knows that there will be a second wave no matter what. So opening makes perfect sense. And people say, oh, well, we'll prevent the spread. No, there's no evidence that keeping things locked down or social distancing worked. I've shown that. Social distancing, there's no studies that prove that social distancing works. It's something that sounds good in theory, so everybody believes it. The lockdowns do not work. The places that didn't lock down have no more level of outbreak than normal. Like I say, these people are absolutely insane. And the reason why I always go on about this so much is that we are going to walk out of this with 25% unemployment, maybe more. And if anything deserves to be repeated, it's this kind of stuff. And the one thing I want to bring up here is that I harp on Trudeau a lot, which he deserves every little bit of criticism he gets and then some. But Jason Kenney and Doug Ford have both promulgated the fear mongering myth that we have to take this step by step. And Doug Ford coming out the other day and, oh, it's just not worth the risk to reopen things more. Like, what are you talking about? The risk is a million times more for not reopening than keeping things closed. When a Great Depression comes, guess what? Jason Kenney, you're going to lose support. Doug Ford, you're going to lose support. And not only that, Jason Kenney, if the main goal is federal politics here, you need Alberta. You need to sweep Alberta if you ever want to get elected, and you are not going to do that if you keep botching this situation. Completely botch this situation, like completely. We should be fully reopened right now, aside from nursing homes and anybody who wants to sit at home and cower in fear. Uh, they can stay at home and cower in fear if they want, but everybody else should be able to go back to their normal lives. There is no evidence to even back up the lockdowns in the first place, let alone still. And this is something that really, really bothers me, and I don't understand why more people aren't up in arms. Now, I do know that like 90% of the people watching this are perfectly aware of all this kind of stuff, but the point being is that you probably come into contact, whether it's online or in person, with people who still support the lockdowns. And when they make the "we need to wait for a vaccine" argument, okay, well throw at them the "there's no guarantee we ever will come up with a vaccine ever, and there's no guarantee that it'll work." The "oh, we'll have a second wave." We're gonna have a second wave no matter what. Like I say, so these arguments that they keep it locked down people make, they're terrible. They're terrible. There's no argument for it. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. But like I say, 19 cases. I mean, 4 people in the hospital. I mean, we have 2 people in the hospital in Edmonton. Edmonton's over 1 million people, and we have 2 people. Two. I mean, we have more than 2 people in the hospital at any given point in time for slipping and falling, for getting attacked by deer. Like, I mean, just imagine the amount of obscure reasons that people are in the hospital, where there's at least 2 at any given point in time. Like, just think of the crazy reasons people are in the hospital. We have 2 people in the Edmonton zone in the hospital for this, and yet we're still worried about reopening. Like, how good is it gonna have to get before you want to reopen? For all we know, we could have 1 person. You idiots will still want to keep things closed. So anyway, and like I say, I know most of the people watching this are fully aware and fully awake to the reality of how stupid the lockdown is. But the main point being is to go over the small percent of people that aren't aware of it, and the people that you know that aren't aware of it. So the big story yesterday was Tam basically came out and admitted we should have closed the borders, and we should have suggested people wear masks earlier and all this kind of stuff. And like I say, I mean, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's like I told you so. I mean, Tam is the supposed to be the nation's top doctor. Probably makes $500,000 a year. But especially when you add up the money she gets from the WHO, and God only knows how much China's giving her under the table at this point. And yet, someone like me who has no formal training in the medical field would have given better suggestions than she did. Like, why in the world does this person still have a job? They should be fired and never get a job for the rest of their lives for being so incompetent. It is because of people like this that we're in such a big mess right now. It is because of them. It is because of them. So that's what I wanted to point out there. And like I say, it's absolutely insane that we're still at this point. Now, I mean, I know that the majority of people aren't even listening, but for the small percentage of people that are still listening to Tam and Trudeau and Haydu's advice, like, what planet are you living on? Like, seriously. Um, so the other big story that came out yesterday that I wanted to talk about was Governor DeSantis in Florida was basically went on a little bit of a rant, which again, it was fully justified. I mean, just this video has 5.5 million views, so I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that, yeah, it went viral. But um, the mainstream media has completely botched this whole situation. I mean, they've been lying to people. I mean, they're clearly biased towards the keep it locked down side. And DeSantis ripped them in that he pointed out that their beaches and much of their economy has been open for over a month now, like much of it. And like I keep pointing out too that the government in Alberta, the governments in Canada right now are trying to decide, okay, when should we be reopening? How should we reopen? And one of the easiest ways to point to whether or not we should reopen is to look at the places that have been open for longer than us and say, hey, have they had massive amounts of outbreak? Oh, no, they haven't. Oh, we should open then. like that is like a 6-year-old could has the critical thinkings to figure this kind of stuff out. And yet you have Kenny, you have Ford, you have the federal government still wanting to keep things locked down. Like, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? Um, and like I said, the reason why I bring this up so much is that number one, Kenny is losing support from this guaranteed. I know a lot of people who are reconsidering their support of him. Uh, and that's going to lead to the NDP getting reelected, or not reelected, elected, which is going to be socialism, which is going to destroy Alberta and destroy Canada's chances of ever not becoming socialist. So, um, yeah, like would it, like I say, how does it not make, how would it, like I say, when you're deciding, like, take Alberta, we're deciding, okay, well, when should we go to phase two, when should we go to phase three? The easiest way to decide whether or not we should go, aside from our own cases, which again they're going way down, so there's no reason to double, to doubt yourself when it comes to our own cases. Look at the places that have been reopened for longer than us, and none of them have had issues. Therefore, there's no reason whatsoever for us not to be reopened. None whatsoever. Um, this is another thing I wanted to bring up here. This is from Kyle Mann. He goes on to say, I like how the same people who dismantled the traditional nuclear family suddenly care about grandma. I can say it's a good point. And that the generation of people that were having kids in like the 1950s and 60s, where most of the people who are dying right now are the generation of people that they hate the most. Therefore, why did they care about them all of a sudden so much? Like, why do you care about them so much? Now, the real reason that they care about them so much is that they want socialism. They want a big, giant, more powerful government. And keeping things locked down makes it more and more inevitable that the government will try and grab more and more of that power and more socialism. So that's why they want this. The real reason that they want the lockdowns is they want socialism. Like, let's just be honest about it. Like, you're not fooling me. You're not fooling most people anymore. Most people know that this is BS. It's complete BS. The lockdowns never should have happened in the first place, let alone still be happening. And it's like I say too. I want to make this point once again, even though I've made it lots before. The negative ramifications from locking things down and keeping them locked down for much longer than we should have is going to cause much more damage than the lockdowns. You know, I seen a stat the other day that for every 1% unemployment in the states, about 1,000 people, maybe it's like 900 to 1,000 people kill themselves from suicide for every 1% increase in employment. The state's unemployment's gone up more than 20%. So we're looking at 20,000 people roughly who are going to kill themselves from this, and that's just the people that are going to die from suicide. How many people are going to die because they didn't grow up, or are going to commit suicide later because they didn't grow up with a mom or a dad? How many people are going to develop drug addictions because they didn't grow up in a two-parent household, which we know decreases people's chances of going to jail, of becoming drug addicts, of every negative outcome in society? What about the people who aren't getting surgeries? I've heard of tons of cases now of people who have died because they couldn't get quote unquote elective surgeries, even though a lot of them aren't quote unquote elective. This is the stupidest thing we've ever done in most people's lifetimes. And the last thing I wanted to bring up here is pretty much the definition of a tweet that did not age well. And I'll read it, and then I'm sure you'll understand why. And it's from Justin Trudeau from October 17th of 2013. And he says, rising debt, rising unemployment, rising disappointment from Canadians. That is the economic legacy of this conservative government. Now, the debt from the Liberals just in 2020 very much could be, and we're on track for it, so unless they cut back on spending, it's going to happen. The debt of 2020 from the Liberals is going to be more than the debt that the country of Canada accumulated from 1867 through 2019. That is how much debt that the Liberals are bringing on. And the first thing I wanted to point out with that is that if Keynesian economics works, which is what the overwhelming majority of leftists cite as their way of economic thinking, if not, it's just flat out socialism. But if Keynesian economics works, then we should see a massive economic boom like next year or the year after that, which we're not going to see. But if Keynesian economics works, then we should see a massive economic boom, because the Keynesian theory is that when the economy slows, you go and you run deficits, and we're running a huge deficit. Therefore, the economy should boom because we're running an even bigger deficit. So, like I said, the other point, rising unemployment. Again, unemployment rate's literally the highest in Canadian history, so that kind of speaks for itself. Rising disappointment. Again, Canadians are mad right now, like mad right now, and like I say, a lot of them don't realize just how bad things are going to get, because a lot of them are being paid by the government not to work, and when the government can no longer pay people not to work, then the reckoning is going to happen. So I wanted to bring this up because this is pretty much the definition of a tweet that did not age well. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Again, I just got Twitter, so check me out there, and check me out on BitChute as well. Again, all the links in the description, so you can find them all there.